In episode 7, Trigger, Trauma, or Truth, what your group conflict is really telling you, John and I explore what conflict in your group is actually signaling. We examine understanding triggers, how personal reactions shape the room, and we look at shared systemic traumas and how collective wounds influence group dynamics. In truth telling and group conflicts, we ask what happens when someone names something real. We explore facilitation and co facilitation and why self regulation is foundational for managing tension. We also compare corporate and social sector conflict dynamics because context matters and shapes our behavior. As always, you'll find companion resources in the description, including a question to continue the conversation.
Oh, Fred, how are you?
Oh, John, I'm good, man. I'm excited about today. And always excited to be with you in this forum and to see what happens, what emerges. And with that, what are we talking about today, John?
Yes, today we're talking about triggers, traumas, or truths. What your group conflict is really telling you. So that has to do with, let's say you're in a meeting. Someone snaps, someone shuts down, someone walks out. What just happened? The answer isn't what you think.
Oh boy. I'm trying to be provocative. The answer is not what you think. Okay. All right. Let's let's break this down. Right. I think it starts with um the three words you brought to bear right in the beginning, right? Triggers, traumas, or truths. And how do we understand those words? How do we unpack those words? And what the heck do they have to do with conflict? Help me understand. What are we talking about?
All right, all right. I love the invitation. Let's do one at a time.
All right.
So, for this context, we have framed, Fred and I, we'll frame this conversation along triggers, traumas, and truths. So, what are triggers in terms of conflict? Well, how do they come up? Triggers have to do with past wounds. Something gets stimulated, something reminds you of something, a personal trigger in your life. We can unpack that, talk about triggers. Traumas, in this case, we're going to talk about traumas from a systemic historical perspective. Something the group shares, we're together. Like you and I might have a common experience around something systemically. And so that might trigger the group. An example I think of sometimes with Latinos, just to make this really clear, especially those of us that grew up in families that spoke Spanish as the primary language at home, a shared kind of trauma is that shift you go through when you start speaking English, particularly in school, and how other kids react to you. So that would be a kind of a shared trauma. And then there's truths, right? The truths. Someone names something that's actually happening, but the group isn't ready for it. So those are examples of, and let's just unpack some of this so that we relate it to, for those of the folks that are out there wondering, well, heck, what do traumas have to do? Or we'll do triggers first. What do triggers have to do with the work we're doing and what's happening in this group? How's that causing conflict for the group?
One of the things that I'm struggling a little bit about is this idea of trigger at the individual level, trauma at the collective level. Does it happen at the individual? Where does it and how does it happen? And so because they're so interrelated. It's often hard for me just to kind of dissect them and pull and tease them apart. Um, but one of the things that helps me start to see some of the differences is when I start to pay attention just to my own triggers, right? Of for example, when I'm in a group setting and get talked over, my blood pressure starts to go up. Right? I start to make up stories about the other person's and intention, and it goes kind of like this. Oh, that person talked over me. That person is disrespecting who I am as a black man. I
Mm-hmm.
know for a fact that person's racist, whatever it is, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And then if I'm not careful, I'm going to act out on that assumption, right? Getting to Arjun's work on the
Mm.
ladder of inference, and potentially ruin the relationship. So that's part of how I'm making sense of this concept of trigger, and help myself understand what I'm trying to say here, John.
I really like that the way you're unpacking this. So for the conversation for today, right? Like there are many ways we can talk about triggers and trauma. Sometimes some people might even use these words interchangeably. And we're certainly welcoming comments, input. There's no perfect way to frame any of this. But for the sake of understanding what's behind the conflict that you see in the space, you experience in the space as a leader, as a facilitator, as someone that's trying to get something done, we're going to frame for today triggers at the individual level. Things that trigger me, unique to John, unique to the individuals in the room. What are their triggers? Where are these triggers coming from? So, for example, one thing a trigger for me might be if someone changes something abruptly, a plan that we have in a meeting. So, my sense of control or lack of control growing up and lack of control over the environment in which I grew up outside of the home, so both in the home and outside the home, right? My mom was someone that experienced a lot of worry over us and a lot of worry about our well-being and our day-to-day well-being and survival and needs. So there was an anxiety. She was anxious about this, right? And so to have control over things was the only time we felt a little relief, those moments of control, however fleeting they may have been. And so then you leave the home and you're in an environment where you also don't have a lot of control for a variety of reasons. And now you enter the world outside of your immediate neighborhood, say in college or your first job. And now control is shared and structured in a hierarchical organizational way that you don't fully understand, in a cultural way you don't fully understand. So now I'm being triggered all the time because I take every new thing as, oh, you're trying to take away my control.
Hmm.
We have a problem because I need to have control. So when it's just an innocent question about new plans or adjustments or someone raising something, I'll go, what you mean you're going to change the plan? Why are you changing the plans? No. We agreed that it would be on this day, start at this time with these panelists or these speakers. And now you're trying to change up on me. So I'm losing control, right? Now the request might be perfectly reasonable, but because of this trigger of control that I have, it's impacting me in ways you described. Somatically, in other words, my heart rate might go up, or I might start perspiring, or I feel tense, or I feel angry, or something's going on in me. So those are triggers at the individual level and where they come from. And they're infinitely variable once you have a group of people because the entire team, and if you're in a large group, you're working on a collective impact initiative, you might have 60, 70 people in the room. If you work on a large scale social change stuff, you might have 3,000 people in a room, 500, 100. And each of those individuals is connected in some way about something, and they all have history and triggers, right? And so the thing for me as a leader is not to jump to conclusions, not to misread that, not to say, oh, they just don't get it, or they're just being, they're just resisting for no good reason. They're just being difficult. So that's how we're defining that trigger in this case. And the traumas is more on the collective level that we're talking about. So what are some shared traumas that, say, Black men have, Latinos, women, members of the LGBTQ plus community, others, right? There's some shared experiences that we understand a part of that group, right? And so those are our collective traumas. And
Mhm.
if you're in a group, some of that is going to show up also. And you may be wondering why. It's very common when I'm working with mixed groups from different backgrounds and ages and races, ethnicities. I'll leave the meeting and the white members tell me something about the experience they had that's, let's say, favorable, and how excited they are about all that was accomplished and how we're able to move forward now. And then I'll talk to the Black members of the group and I get a different version about the same meeting, right? And it's not necessarily favorable. So those are the ways in which collective experiences impact the dynamics. So those are two ways I'm thinking that we can explore and a part of the reality. So if people listening, did this resonate with you, right? I would ask. And I would say, to answer your question, or really not even to answer your question, but just to open up an exploration about how does that sound to you, right? When you
Mhm.
hear this framing, where do you see this playing out in human dynamics, in groups, and how people can collectively act together with these realities going on in their minds and bodies?
I think, John, that this question of how does it show up in your mind and your body is paramount, is really important. I mean, you started to name it, right? You said when you got triggered around your control issues, right? That anxiety from your personal past comes right to the forefront, right? And you said that
Mm-hmm.
your heart starts beating faster, and that there's this loss of control. Well, what's happening? Why is your heart beating faster, right? Because the hormones, the stress hormones, are flooding your system. And
Mm-hmm.
what do we know about that? That when those hormones flood your system, you're also cutting off access to your prefrontal cortex,
Mm-hmm.
right? So your ability to think in the moment is compromised. And that's also one of the reasons why we want to bring that to our attention, is that the the trigger response is not just personal; it's also collective, right? And you started to talk about the history of the trauma at the collective level, and how different identities, social identities, respond to the same stimuli, right? And the story that you reminded me of just now is when I was in grad school, and we were in our um, diversity consulting module, and I'm sitting in the back with a bunch of my colleagues. And the instructor at one point started to say, she was talking about code switching, and she was talking about a colleague of hers that was speaking to another colleague using African American vernacular. And her response, this is the instructor's response. She said, and I didn't even recognize the boy, talking about a grown man. And the students of color, e- every single one of us, it was like, what? What just happened? Right. And then in that moment, we also all colluded with one another in silence I'm not even going to bring this one up. This is not the time, and we don't want to invest. And that was the thing that was going through my mind. But the good thing was that this person had a co-facilitator who picked up on that trauma response from the group. And we had the opportunity to stop motion, take a time out, say, oh, what was that about? And how do we address it? And what do we do with that? And the white students in the class didn't even see it. Right. And that was a powerful moment of what you're talking about. There was conflict, but it could have easily just been under the radar. Nobody would have known except for this one perceptive facilitator, but everybody would know, right? At some level. And I think that's what we're talking about here, is that, it's not necessarily what you think is happening, and how do you diagnose what's happening in the moment. So that's what was coming up. It just popped in, as most of these stories usually do. When you and I get together, we start tapping into something that's powerful and important to talk about.
So that story is really, really helpful to me in terms of framing what happens in these spaces where people come together to try to make something possible happen, or something they want to work on, something they're committed to. Whether, again, that's working for a just living wage, or housing equality, or food scarcity, whatever the thing is that the group is working on, whatever you're working on, those listening out in the world. So Fred's example, the irony is it was in a diversity module, diversity course, and this was occurring. And this is how it happens in the real world. So you're together, say, in a collective impact initiative. There are 50, 60 people in the room. You have your breakouts. It's not uncommon for people who are aligned, who are working on the same cause, the same purpose, right, to say and do things that trigger, right, or re-traumatize, right? So the trigger is something that happens to me in the moment, and I have this visceral reaction, right? The trauma part, I might have more awareness around, I may not. But in the example you gave, it's like we understand the idea of not calling a grown man a boy, right? Like that's if I unpack that with most, let's just say, progressive aligned groups, most people get that that's like something you don't do and you shouldn't be doing. They may not always understand why, but they get that at some level. So this happens all the time. I have examples, similar examples in coalitions that were working on issues, say, around economic disparity or wealth inequality. And the experiences of some folks in the room around wealth or wealth inequality are very different from others. And so they start saying things and making assumptions about the environment they grew up in, or, gee, it was tough because we had to, get by with my mother's salary at her law firm when my father was laid off, right? And so that sounds very different to someone who may not have had two parents. If they had two parents, both were marginally employed, and together their joint incomes didn't add up to a living wage, right? And so what is being presented as a struggle might land differently on those ears. Right. So these are kind of examples of triggers and traumas depending on what people have gone through. And so as a leader, you're going to experience people expressing frustration in the case of the class you described, someone, a facilitator, was able to intervene. In the case of a collective impact effort, you want to keep people working together over a long period of time toward a goal, some results to get something done. And so, how does the leader recognize that and move past the point or through the point or even with the point? Like in the case of the example you gave, you unpack that, you sit with it. Why shouldn't you be saying boy to someone and you talk about it and you settle that, or at least create enough self-regulation, right? Enough calmness in the room that people can take that forward and do their own work on their own as needed, and the group is more able to move collectively together. So that's difficult because you weren't planning for that. You had a whole nother agenda planned for that day or that event. And so how does a leader, Fred, what can we be thinking about? What can they be doing? And we recognize that conflict's going to happen. It's telling you something. It's not necessarily telling you people are disagreeing about the agenda item. It's all this other stuff that we just gave examples on, right? It's not even the main point of the meeting that they're disagreeing on. It's all the triggers and traumas that are playing out under the surface that are causing people to act out, walk out, yell, accuse each other, finger point, whatever, however it shows up, however it manifests itself in your group. Could be through silence, could be through passive aggressive behavior. Now the group is stalled, stuck. And if enough people start behaving that way, you can't move forward together. You cannot advance your cause.
So there's no one right way. Right? I think the first step is really acknowledging that there are multiple truths bubbling up in multiple forms at all times, right? And you can't go into a meeting with a group believing that everybody's on the same page, and so just by understanding that I'm walking into complexity because I'm in a group of difference.
Mm.
Step one. Step two, when behavior happens, because behavior will.
Yes, behavior will happen.
You address it, right?
Mhm.
But you have to address it with taking stock and paying attention to what are the possible pain points in the room, and doing that work ahead of time, doing that work on yourself and knowing your own triggers, right? I got an issue with authority. And so when somebody comes in and tries to change the route, that's going to hit me. I know that. And here's what I'm going to do with that. Or when someone cuts me off, that's another one. And this is what I'm going to do when when that happens. And one of the key things, one of the most powerful tools that you can utilize to help is co-facilitate. Get somebody else with you, because you will become triggered. And sometimes I need help from John. John, can you take this on? Because I need a minute to come back to my baseline, right? If I know that the amygdala hijack just happened not because I am imperfect, right? That's why it happens. I'm a human being. I will get triggered. I just need a minute to come back online. And how do I, and knowing that triggers, when that heart rate goes up or that stomach drops or your face gets flushed, all those things, that means you're offline. You're not at your best. And so how do you get back online? And I think part of it for me is grounding exercises, breathing exercises. Those types of things are so powerful to kind of just taking stock of that, what I'm calling step step one and step two. What?
Let's go back though to another point you made,
Okay.
the one about co-facilitating,
Mm.
because I think that the co-facilitation could allow you to take a breath and step back. Right? If you're the only one, then it feels like, well, how am I going to step back? I mean, I'm here, I'm in the thick of it with everyone. There's some kind of conflict going on. I'm not sure what it. Co-facilitation allows you to step back.
Yeah. Not only does it allow you to step back, it allows you to spread the energy, right? How many times have you facilitated high stakes, highly charged situations by yourself? Raise your hand. I've done it and walked away exhausted. Same sort of high stakes with a co-facilitator. I'm still in it 100%, but I don't walk away totally depleted because we're sharing the hidden labor of holding everyone together, right? And then we can split the energy, because that holding the coalition together is hard enough work. And if I can say, hey John, can you hold this space? Can you track this? Can you do this part? Can you take a look at me while I'm facilitating? And and if we have done our contracting together as co-facilitators, then when I'm triggered. If we've got that deep relationship, I know when you're triggered. I know when to slide in and say, "Hey, John, I got this. Let me let me redirect." Right? And if we trust each other enough, we understand that and trust where our collective co-facilitative interventions are going. So those are kind of the best practices around co-facilitations that I've seen and witnessed and felt the power of. And I really try as much as I can not to enter high stakes, highly charged environments without a co-facilitator. And I know that's a luxury that I have at this time. And if you don't have that luxury, start building it. Start building your co-facilitation team to support ultimately everyone's energy, right? The energy of the group, the energy of the individual, and of course the subgroups that happen within coalitions all the time.
So framing that in a coalition context where people who are facilitating, leading, are the leaders themselves, the people in the group or members, and there's not always, like you just said, an explicit understanding of co-facilitation or what's behind it, or even the training necessarily. They're people doing their best with their best intentions to get through a session, a work session, an issue, part of a series of gatherings that are part of moving our coalition over an extended period of time. And so some of the ways, and again, to stay on that topic, some of the ways in which I've seen this done is to practice and develop facilitation skills among as many members as you can. So let's say it's a coalition and you are the leader of that coalition, or if you're in a really flat organization, you are the moderator for that event or the facilitator for that event, or a nonprofit where you might have the executive director present with some program directors and some of their staff, their administrative staff. One of the ways in which to accomplish what Fred is suggesting here is to alternate facilitation at meetings when you don't have a crisis, when you don't have a conflict, when you don't have a breakdown. So, matter of fact, two groups that I'm currently supporting as a resource, what I'm having them do is take turns so that everyone who attends that meeting, these are relatively small meetings of less than 20 people, Each participant gets a chance to facilitate a meeting or facilitate a portion of a meeting. And we do this gradually. So if we do the 3 breaths, or if we do an opening question or a check-in, or we do something at the end, a closing kind of practice, they can take one piece of one of those things and they practice. Next time someone else does it. Next time they take 2 pieces. So they literally go around the room and have people develop that capacity for co-facilitation so that when they need it, right, the executive director says, oops, high stakes thing, we're at a mixed meeting, we're at a retreat, say with board members, staff, maybe some funders, something goes awry, that capacity is built into her team, or his team. So they can say, hey, so-and-so, what are your thoughts on this? Or one of her staff can notice the conflict and say, I have a thought on that, and start to practice co-facilitation. Or once they get enough capacity, they can be intentional about that. In this meeting, listen, why don't we go in here and share this? And you take some parts, and I'll take some parts. So it's not a formal structure where you have to learn to dance with another professional facilitator, but it is building capacity. So those are some ways that I would interpret what you shared so that they can actualize it in the system by literally practicing. One leadership team, a different group that I'm working with, we have now an agreement at the leadership team meetings. There will always be alternating facilitators. And that is growing the entire leadership team's capacity and taking a lot of weight off the leader to have to be the one with that responsibility or with the answers all the time. And in both of these groups, except for when I'm there, they're operating on their own. They don't have access to an external facilitator on a regular basis for everything that they do or every meeting that they have. So by growing that capacity, they own it, it's theirs, everyone shares it. And one little thing that I like to appreciate and notice, they can carry it into their other community initiatives. They can carry, if they're working at another agency, if they're volunteering somewhere else, if they serve on another board, they can take that same skill and say, you know what, why don't we all learn to do this together?
I love it, John. What you're naming is the concept of practice, right? As you and I know, you can read all the books you want about facilitation and technique and theory. None of it's going to help you.
Mhm.
It'll help you think about it in the abstract, but this is one of those skills. You got to be in it. You got to be in the arena. You got to be on the mat doing your reps. And I like how
Mhm.
you laid it out. It doesn't have to be the whole thing. It's little parts. Get really good at that little part.
Mm.
Put that one aside. Get a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. And the beauty of what you just said too is that this skill is transferable. You can take it anywhere once you have it. And the teams that spread the wealth and become really good at that and don't need to hire a professional like John or myself, and they can do it themselves. That's a powerful team doing some powerful transformative work. And you have to pay your dues. You got to
Mhm.
practice. There's no shortcut. There's only getting better at it, and it requires repetition after repetition. So thank you for reminding me. I still got to practice, no matter how long I've been doing this thing.
Truth, truth. So, just reflecting back on our title for today's episode again, triggers, traumas, or truths, what your group conflict is really telling you. And what I'm getting from this conversation is that the group conflict is telling me if I'm leading this group or co leading this group, it's people just making their best effort while all the traumas and all the triggers and the truths they're trying to get out there that are true for them, like in the story you shared in the diversity module. While all this is playing out, they're just doing their best to show up. And what is your job as a leader, someone moderating, facilitating this group towards success, is to understand that those are efforts being made. They're not necessarily resistance. They're not attacks at you, at least not directly. They're people trying to figure out the language and way while they're living, having a real experience to show up fully. And your job is to figure out how to turn that into a useful conversation, a useful dialogue, a useful learning experience so people can keep moving forward. So in that vein, in terms of going forward, what are some things that you think beyond what we just shared that people could be doing to improve how they regulate themselves and not take it personally when there's a conflict in a group? So that's not about judging or jumping to conclusions, but more about curiosity and exploration.
Yeah, I think we've hit on it tangentially a couple times in our conversation as far as about what you do, and kind of looking at it from the um, intervention space, like when there's a trigger, or when you're triggered, what's the first thing that I need to do in that moment, right? And it's this idea of, how do I bring myself back online? We talked about the breathing,
Mm-hmm.
um, as one step. If it's a trauma, I think one of the things that we didn't talk about is just slowing the whole process down, right?
Mm.
And how do you do that? How do you slow it down? And part of it is naming it to tame it, right? If you're
Mm-hmm.
starting to
Mm-hmm.
see that there was some sort of reaction, one of my favorite ways to slow it down is ask the question, what just happened here? I'm noticing something. And in fact, I'm noticing something that's happening in myself right now. My heart's beating a little fast. Anybody else having that reaction? Yeah. Tell me about that. Tell me what's going on with that. Right. One of the things that we haven't really addressed is, what do you do with when someone speaks the truth in the group? Right. Brings up something that you might not have wanted to hear, or that, and you said it earlier, that the group doesn't want to hear, and how easily that truth teller can become the scapegoat. Oh, there's John again, talking nonsense. He's so sensitive,
Mm-hmm.
right? I've heard that happen. And as a facilitator, I need to step in and say, oh, wait a minute. I've got to protect the truth teller, right? I have to welcome the truth teller. And even if it's about my facilitation, first thing out of my mouth is always, thank you. Thank you for bringing that perspective. I hadn't thought of it that way before. Your voice matters. All voices matter in this moment of time. And so those are just some of the first layer, I think, surface level kind of first steps, if you will, when triggers happen in self. And kind of self-regulate when you see triggers happen in others. Need to be able to call and name the emotion and accept the emotion that's in that space, slowing the room down and protecting the truth tellers at all times. I think those are some of the first steps that I would recommend.
Those are very sound steps. And just to borrow that, to draw um, a comparison between corporate and the social sector where that may be playing out, truth tellers, imagine in a private corporation, people speaking their truth, right? So what do they say? Oh, well, they're new here. They don't get it. Or they've been here so long, they have just lost touch. or you know what, that's just that person's always complaining about something, you know, those contrarians, right? Now you apply that to a nonprofit or social sector environment. People say, well, what's the difference? Well, in the corporate environment, at some point, those individuals, if they're perceived that way, the dominant culture is going to prevail and they get them to conform or exit them from the system. That is generally what's going to happen in a for-profit setting. In and there's some rare exceptions, you know. If you're a nuclear scientist and you're the only one in the company, they might put up with you a little longer. But for the run-of-the-mill employee, for most people, you know, you're going to have to get with the current culture and program, or you're going to have to exit. In the social sector environment, it's going to be very different, because in that environment, you have to move collectively. So the reason you're making space, as Fred is suggesting, the reason you're listening to people express their truth, the reason you're taking the time, the reason you're embracing it, the reason you're stopping action or deviating from the planned agenda to keep people involved and connected is because you own this together. And it is the collective that needs to move forward in order to accomplish whatever the goal is. That doesn't mean you don't have boundaries. It doesn't mean you don't have time limits. It doesn't mean you don't take people offline. It doesn't mean individuals sometimes get so traumatized that they can't self-regulate at all, and you have to literally stop action to figure out what you're going to do next, right? So you have to figure out, but you have to get comfortable with that. So if you come from a command control environment or a very rigid private sector for-profit environment, that might be unsettling to you. You might start using words like, well, this is inefficient. I can't attend to everybody's needs, right? That just means you haven't developed that skill yet. That's all it means. In the same way that you have to develop the skills in the for-profit sector to succeed and move up the corporate ladder, there are a different set of skills required to move communities collectively together. When you look at social identity groups from representing different constituencies and different groups, and they have to come together to form coalitions while still advocating for disabled rights and LGBTQ rights and the rights of immigrant children and etc. They still have to find a way to move together. And that's what Fred and I are trying to impart on you in terms of why you take the time and why you stop and why you notice. Because what you might be defining as a conflict, say in a corporate environment, is actually an opportunity. It's people sending you their warning signals. It's the sensors going off, those humans' internal sensors saying, look, I want to stay, I want to play, I want to help, but I'm having trouble right now. Help me understand so that I can feel heard and continue this journey with you. And what you want is you want your membership to grow. You want the journey to grow. And that's not an easy thing to do. And for sure, those of you doing social sector work, especially in the nonprofit sector, you definitely are not compensated near enough to be carrying that amount of weight. But that's why we keep bringing up the self-care pieces and all pieces, and we'll continue to do that. But please continue this dialogue with us. We know we don't have all the answers. We're very interested in what you have to say. We want to learn together. So today we mentioned the ladder of inference, and I don't remember if we mentioned the Johari window or not, but we'll put some PDFs together on those topics so that you can have access to what we were talking about there and how to use those tools. And we'll continue to add more and more resources that will help you. But the biggest resource we have is you. The biggest resource we have is this collective community and how we learn and share with one another. So again, as always, we appreciate your time. Fred, any closing words?
I just wanted to kind of foot stomp what you were talking about, the skills necessary in the social sector versus the corporate sector. And I think that's probably another podcast for us
Yes,
to
for
have
sure.
a conversation about what's the same, what's different, what do you need to let go of, and what do you need to bring forward, right? And how those skills can either enhance your capabilities or get in your way. So I'm excited about the future. And I love what you said about the fact that we don't have all the answers and that the resource is the community that we're building collectively together. And as usual, and what John loves to say, be the calm in the chaos.
See you next time.